This episode of No Chicanery is serious in nature, and the conversation may be triggering. We apologize in advance, and we hope that we can provide insight to some of the narratives spoken about, as well as demystify the inaccuracies in the hopes that we can further protect our community.
I won't apologize for the way you make you feel, and I won't apologize for the way I need to heal.
All right, greetings. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shekhinah B. I'm the host of No Chicanery, our interactive talk series. And this evening's conversation will be serious. And if anyone feels triggered by the content and the topics that will be discussed during this conversation, feel free to, terminate the view of this talk. I introduce to you two esteemed colleagues that are protecting the lives of women in Philadelphia and around the world with the information work that they do. I bring to you Teresa White-Walston, the Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence. She's had over 21 years of experience with victims services, and she's responsible for the development and management of the prevention services that supports multiple institutions and entities within the region. Also have with me today ADA, the council, law enforcement, superwoman, Adara Combs. I want to say shout out to the Owls, also a Temple alumni, esteemed from the Beasley School of Law. And she is now the Assistant Chief of Juvenile Division at the District Attorney's Office in Philadelphia. And, you're just saving lives and, providing this service. The services that you both provide to the community is priceless. And I appreciate everything that you both are doing. And I had to come to you about this conversation, this topic, because so many people are unaware about sexual assault or rape. By legal definition, what is rape?
So rape in and of itself. So rape is one thing. And then there's a bunch of other different things that people think of when they think of rape, but aren't actually rape in the legal sense, at least not in Pennsylvania. So I actually, in preparation for this conversation, went to my crimes code and I blew the dust off to open it up, to actually, go to the law and make sure that I have, the actual black letter law is what we call it, as opposed to, just my knowledge through practice, because, things and you just be able to rattle them off, but to have the actual black letter law in front of you is important. So rape is actually codified in section 3121 of the Crimes Code in Pennsylvania. So that is rape. And when we're talking about rape, we're talking about penetration, however slight. And we're also talking about oral penetration. So vaginal penetration, as well as oral penetration, meaning oral sex, and penetrating one's vagina. And that's by force, that's by threat of force. That can be when someone's unconscious. That can be when someone is substantially enabled from making decisions, either through some type of mental defect or something of the sort, whether they're unconscious because of a medical reason, so on and so forth. And also mental disability, and adding to that, whether or not someone is intoxicated or inebriated at the doing of the person who is assaulting them.
That part.
So that is what rape is. But there are so many other things that are not captured in that definition of rape that are codified in other sections. So if anyone's ever interested, they can go to that section of the Crimes Code. You can literally just Google it, and they all come up right after each other. So right after that, section 3122 is statutory rape, which is talking about rape below the age of consent. So in Pennsylvania, the age of consent is 16 years old. Anyone below that can't consent to sex with somebody or sexual intercourse or actions with anyone.
Below the age of 16.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Correct. There are a lot of caveats when it comes to kids having sex with each other. But as far as adults go, if you are 25, you cannot have sex with someone who is 14. They can't consent to sex with you. So that's statutory rape. There you go. It's always important. And if you look at that statutory rape section, I won't go into the nuances because they're very detailed, but within a certain amount of years of someone, you are committing statutory rape. So if you're a year older than someone that's 16, so you're 17, you're not committing statutory rape. But if you are beyond that and they're 15, then yes, that's statutory rape. So there are a lot of nuances with that. After that, there is statutory sexual assault, which is very similar, but it breaks it down into different gradations. And that's where you get those age brackets. So if anyone's interested in that, that's where you find that information. But then there's so many other different types of acts, right? Like sexually violating someone is not just sticking your penis or something into their vagina or into their mouth. That's not the only thing that can violate one sexually, right? So there are other things within the crimes code that capture that. So there's involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, which captures anal sex. Which also, excuse me, which is important because we have a whole subset of actions that happen, and that doesn't mean that the person's any less violated. So we need to make sure that we capture that. And that's not only entering a private part into someone's anus, but that's an object as well. So that is the code that codifies that. Moving along, you also have indecent assault. So touching one's body for sexual gratification. And it's important to have that piece in there because if you're going to the doctor and you're getting an exam, well, unless it, shifts gears, that's not going to be indecent assault, but they're still touching your private parts, right? If someone is needing assistance to be cleaned because they cannot clean themselves, that would not be a crime, right? Because that's something that is being done for their health and for their welfare. But someone putting their hand on your breast or putting your hand on your butt or on your penis or your vagina or so on and so forth, that would be indecent assault. And it would be aggravated if they were to insert their finger or some other object into your body. So there are just different levels to rape. So that's why when the first question, I was like, oh, let me go and get the crimes code, because there's levels to this, much like there are in anything in life. And it's important that we understand that.
So let me just jump in right here. We spoke about a lot of the insertion, the involuntary, unwanted, non-consensual assertion. And a lot of times it seems like it's primarily applicable to, in the minds of many people, just women being victims of said, crime. So I ask you, Teresa, in your experience over 21 years, have you ever seen many cases where men or non-binary individuals reporting these types of crimes and needing supports? What does the law protect in the same way? Like, what does that look like?
Well, one thing is that the law is genderless, and that's something when I am, teaching prevention, that we bring out. I mean, I know historically the law was really designed. That's how WOAR began as an organization at a time where there were no concerns, as it were. There was not legislation to protect survivors of sexual assault or rape for women or children. And so all the work that's been done is designed to strengthen. And now we have this fantastic set of laws that protect, but the protection isn't just exclusive to gender at this point. The law is genderless. It doesn't care about your orientation. And so, yes, the reality is, and especially as you said, we're in a time now where relationships are emerging in different ways. And so regardless to what your gender, your orientation, the law protects you equally. And so, yes, we are seeing, that's one of the reasons WOAR changed its name from Women Organized Against Rape to WOAR, Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence, because we wanted to make sure that anyone who was victimized could feel very comfortable and getting the necessary treatment and support that we're able to provide. And yes, we do see and have always seen male on male or individuals that identify as male sexual violence. But what you're seeing now is because it's more, I don't want to use the word acceptable, it's more knowledgeable, because sexual violence is one of the most underreported, if not the most underreported crimes. Right. And so a lot of folks, when they're adults, are seeking support over things that happened when they were children, adolescents, or teens. So definitely males now, we're getting more reporting, but they've always been victimized. And I think a lot of the cases that have been in the media over the past couple of years with different institutions testifies to the fact that there have always been males as victims of some form of sexual assault and rape.
Can we speak to I guess the egregious nature of rape in general, but date rape And how do you define that? What is date rape?
So I will be happy to answer that. I just want to make sure that I make a point clear.
Oh, absolutely.
That, and I thought about it, and this is also a testament to the conditioning that we receive as people, thinking about rape as far as a gender. And Teresa's absolutely correct that the law is genderless. And I just want to make clear that rape also includes the penetration of the anus, not just the vagina. So it captures sexual assault and rape against men as well. So does the aggravated indecent assault, or involuntary sexual intercourse charge as well. So I just wanted to make that clear, because those were not always the case. So I just wanted to be clear with that.
Do we know when that changed? What year, if that changed? Because I know prior to, it was always like man against woman, and it was never like perceived as the possibility that a man could actually be raped as well.
I don't know the date, but it's certainly been for as long as I've been in practice.
Okay.
So I know that this is not a change that I witnessed. It has always been that way since I've been practicing. Those statutes have always included both acts, and as well as foreign objects. And I think that's important because there are a lot of people who are sexually assaulted with things and not body parts.
Yes.
And I ask in terms of males, men, even boys coming with the allegation of this act. Many of them don't perceive it as that. Sometimes it's like someone older having, a statutory relationship of sorts, illegal, of course, with a younger man, a younger male person. And they're like, well, they didn't force me, but you were coerced. You were, under the authority of an adult who knew better and took advantage of, your innocence. And goes underreported because we kind of normalize this. Like, we want to dispel this rape culture narrative and we need to cancel that. Terminate it.
Absolutely. And I mean, in Pennsylvania, there's somewhat of a presumption that if there's a power imbalance between parties, that consent can't be given, right? Like, so if there's some level of control that somebody has over you in some form or fashion, even if you were to have sex with them or perform some sexual act, or important to remember, they perform a sexual act on you, because that is also a violation of the law and of your body in and of itself, that you can't consent to it. Just because you said you didn't say no or you didn't say anything doesn't mean that it would not be able to fall under the criminal statute.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. There is another element. So I did a little bit of research myself, and I saw something about deception. And what does deception include? Impersonating another person, using positions of authority to deceive, like, a sexual harassment case that could potentially be, identified as a rape case. And what you said about authority, having authority over another person, how does that align with the definition of one of the rape statutes, rape by deception? What does that look like?
So there's no rape by deception actual statute. And I think it's important that when we talk about sex assault cases, and I'm sure Teresa will agree, that while we have to use the law as the backdrop, of course, we also have to use the facts and what happened and use our knowledge of the world and how people interact, and what people would believe and what's reasonable and what's not, to guide our decisions and guide what's right and what's wrong. Because the law doesn't say, like, the statutes that I read don't have deception written in the law. That doesn't mean that if a particular set of circumstances were to come about, that doesn't mean that we would decline to do anything about it and that it wouldn't be just as wrong. So I think people need to be clear that if you feel like you've been violated and you feel like something isn't quite right, no, because things happen that are just beyond the legislatures, right? Legislatures write laws. And there may be some things that happen that they just didn't contemplate. They maybe didn't contemplate that somebody said that I am X and I'm really Y, and that's why you did what you did, or you thought I was a firefighter when I came into your bedroom or something. They may not have contemplated that, but that doesn't mean that that factual scenario may not fall into something. So it's important that if you feel violated, you should say something.
So we're clear. I'm getting a little bit more clarity. There is a literal definition of rape, and then there is a legal definition of rape, and the law based off of each state has its own identifiers for what could be what someone could be prosecuted for. Is that what we're clear? I'm so glad you said that. So I guess we need to also be very clear at the conclusion of this. I would definitely shoot me over those links, because I want to add that to the final video. Absolutely. And where people could actually do that research for themselves to know there is the definition, literal word definition, and then there is the legal definition, and the two are not necessarily equally synonymous.
Absolutely.
Something, if I could add into that, Shekhinah, is the fact that in terms of date rape, what we know about rape period or sexual assault period, it's what I term a personal crime. Roughly anywhere from 80 to 85% of the cases that we deal with when it's adults, it's someone that you know. It's not, that stranger piece is out there, but not to the level of, personal crimes where someone that and also with children, we know most of the time it's somewhere around 90 to 95%. It's someone who has access to children. So in that's very important. And I love the distinction that you made when you talked about the fact that it is different from different jurisdictions. You do have to check, what is it in New Jersey? What is it in Delaware? So those are very important pieces for, your audience to know and to recognize. And definitely go check and see what your law is saying in your jurisdiction. Even in Pennsylvania, we have Philadelphia's jurisdiction, but we also know that in the counties, depending on what the law is, or the legislature there, I should say, or how the judges look at things there, it could be very different. And so very important for people to not just assume that it's a blanket, type of circumstance.
I'm so glad that you said that. So the municipality, so there is like the city, and then the municipality, and then the state, and then the federal. So there are different levels to this that have more severity depending on where it happened or where a situation occurred. So are we saying, and I'm asking, if a rape occurred in New Jersey, let's say it happened in Camden, New Jersey, but the person who committed the crime lives in Pennsylvania, how does that work? Who do you go to? Where it occurred, right, or where the person lives?
So jurisdiction generally starts with where the action happened. So if something happened in New Jersey, you would report it in New Jersey. If something happened in Pennsylvania, so on and so forth. And the same thing within cities. So if someone was sexually assaulted at Arcadia University, or Villanova, which is not in Philadelphia, and they live in Philadelphia proper, they need to report those crimes there. Now, that's not to say that they can't go down to SVU in Philadelphia and say, hey, this happened to me, and they won't make that connection and do the introductions and all of that. But that's just say that it does not fall within our jurisdiction. Philadelphia only has, and any municipality only has jurisdiction over what took place in their actual physical space.
Okay.
And the laws do vary. So when I send you the links to those laws, underneath each section, or within each section, I guess I'll say, there are different gradations. And when I say gradation, I mean felony, misdemeanor, first degree, second degree, so on and so forth. And with that comes various penalties. So if you were interested to finding out what the possibilities were for someone who committed, let's say, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse of a minor under the age of 13, that would be different than whether or not they did it to someone who was 45. So there are levels to everything. Everything is so fact specific and detail specific that if you really want the answer to what happens to you in your case, it's important to either A, do the research, or B, ask the people who know the answers to the questions. And just to go back to the date rape idea, I think it was an excellent point that Teresa made about most sexual assaults and rapes are acquaintances. In my career, I can count probably on both of my hands, without using both of my hands, the amount of stranger sexual assaults I have personally dealt with. Now, that's not the amount that have been charged, but the amount that I have dealt with. Most of them are people who know each other, classmates, significant others, because that is a thing. I saw that as a question, significant others as well. family members, older, same age, so on and so forth. But date rape, the term really captures acquaintance rape is what it actually is capturing. And that's usually a scenario where there is either a romantic relationship or the potential for one, and sex or sexual acts are forced upon someone, or they're forced to do something that they did not consent to. And it's also within the backdrop of that romantic or possible romantic situation. But that's really the only difference between date rape and being sexually assaulted by someone you know.
That's scary. What occurs in the event a person is raped or sexually assaulted? And rape kit, they go to the police. What is the process?
So the process when, and I'm going to kind of separate this out. So there's a process for children and there's a process for adults. When children report sexual assault, they go to the Philadelphia Children's Alliance to have a forensic interview. And the process is a little bit different because they're minors. When an adult reports a sexual assault, they can either go to the police department or go to SBU themselves to report that sexual assault, and a statement is taken, what we call a 483. That's a witness or victim statement, and it's oral. Where they're writing or typing whatever it is that the person's saying, and then they have to sign it and say, yes, this is accurate. You have an opportunity to read over your statement to make sure that it's not inaccurate, or make sure there's nothing missing, make sure you don't want to add anything or make a correction. And then you sign it and date it and say, yes, this is my statement. And you cannot have the opportunity to identify the person who sexually assaulted you, usually by picture. If it's somebody that you know, if it's a stranger, there may be a different process, like a lineup or something like that down the line, or a photo array shortly after it happens, providing you're able to actually identify them. They'll ask for descriptions and stuff like that. But if it's somebody that you know, they'll usually have a picture and have you sign it and say, this is such and such. At that point, if it's something that happened where physical evidence can be collected, like let's say somebody was sexually assaulted today and they went immediately to SBU, yes, there'll be a collection of clothing, DNA, oral swabs, or what we call buccal swabs, vaginal swabs, anywhere else on your body, because discharge from a person, whether it be a male or female, can end up anywhere on your body.
Right.
So based on the statement is based on where they would swab your body, and it's literally a swab. And then they put it in, like a vial and it goes for testing. Eventually we'll need to collect DNA from another person to compare it to say it was such and such, or it wasn't such and such. But we also need to remember, and I know we live in an age of, NCIS and SBU.
I'm like, how long does that
forensic
take?
How
long?
The very nuts and bolts of these cases a lot of times comes down to testimony, because a lot of times there's no physical trace. People often, because of trauma, wait to report because they're not in a space to immediately go to the police with the clothing on and not having taken a shower and say, these are the clothes I had on, take them off of me, I'm ready to say what happened. That's not reality. People are traumatized. They run to their confidants, their family, their home, their safe space. And it may take them days, weeks, years to say something. So a lot of times we're not relying on DNA because we simply don't have it. And if we were to link that to belief, we would be in a very scary and dark place. So we can't do that.
So, okay. How long does it take for the moment that a person does a rape kit before they turn around to receive the results?
So it depends. And I know a lot of the answers to these questions is going to be, it depends.
It's not like Law and Order,
situation, no? It's not, unfortunately. They're not running out like, we've got the match. That's not how it happens in real life. It truly does depend. So there are different types of tests. So you can tell whether or not there's the presence of a bodily fluid on somebody through rather relatively quick tests. Now in Philadelphia, unfortunately, we live in a place where there are a lot of criminal acts. And we have a lab that is very overextended, but they do work relatively quickly. But we don't always wait to proceed with charges for that information, because we can always change gears based on the results of the test at a different point in time. So if it's a safety issue, we're likely going to charge that case without the results of the test. But just to kind of separate it out, there are often times where if there is, let's say, semen found in a woman's body, well, we need something to compare that to. Unless this person has previously submitted their DNA for some other reason and come back with what we call a CODIS hit, we're not going to know anything about them to compare to say it was definitely that person. So a lot of times we're entering criminal prosecution and having to get DNA from the person we think it is during that process because we don't have anything to compare it to. Now, there are times where a CODIS hit will come back and we'll know, but that's not often. That's not all the time.
Oh my. Teresa, what
Yes,
what
ma'am.
when a person comes to your organization, is it typically after they've reported to the police, or they're coming for support to eventually go to the authorities to file a claim?
Well, it can be both. And so as Adara Combs talked about the process with SVU, WAR actually has medical advocates co-located at that same response center. WAR actually co-heads up the SART team in Philadelphia. The current rape kit, we were actually a part of the design of that rape kit. So personally, I can say I had a hand involved in identifying the right organization to pull it together. And so the reality of it is when people are going to get treatment, we're going to already be there. And then we're going to also follow up with every survivor who comes through that gives permission for their information to be, made available. And I would venture to say 90% of the time. Again, prior to COVID, we did 24-hour medical advocacy support. I have personally been in the emergency room before we actually had the SART centers that we have now. And what we do get are people who want support to go to the SVU and get the rape kit, tell their story. And then we get plenty of people who never call law enforcement at all. And so we advocate for people reaching out to our hotline. And I know you're going to post that information because a lot of times people don't even know the next step. And if they call us, we actually have a fund at WAR that if a person needs to get to the facility, the Philadelphia Sexual Assault Response Center, we will actually pay for them through Uber to get them there. But we also know that in many cases, if they call law enforcement will do their best to provide, that ride down to the facility and get the treatment. For us, it's a toss. It's a 50-50. What, Adara Combs alluded to the fact that there are many times people are not willing to talk at that moment. And so WAR has fortunately had the opportunity to train SVU on how to deal with survivors of sexual assault when they present. And we recognize that trauma, you may not be willing to talk. And so with that, we want to make sure the most important thing is that they get the medical treatment. That's the most important thing, because down at the response center, you're going to get prophylaxis for STDs and STIs and pregnancy prophylaxis. And I also believe HIV prophylaxis. So if nothing else that your listeners hear, get the medical treatment. The sooner, the better. And I believe that the SVU team and certainly our district attorney's office, they do things well. And if we need to make a report at a time where the person feels a little bit, more comfortable, they can go and still make that report. We have skillful people in place that know how to handle prosecution. That will all be taken care of. Get the medical treatment is priority. There are times where people have been so harmed in the abuse process, there can be extreme violence. They can't make a report. So there's the part of that process of working with that particular survivor. But, the thing about WAR is that whenever people are ready to talk, we're there. Whenever they need guidance, all they have to do is call our hotline. We do have people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week who are trained sexual assault counselors, and we can guide them through the process for treatment, guide them through the process for reporting. We're capable of doing all of that for them.
And this service is available to all genders.
All genders. Our mission is sexual assault prevention and treatment, and we hope to kind of do more with prevention, but we're definitely there for high level therapy for anybody. So we don't need insurance. We're super confidential. We don't care about your status in the country, or Philadelphia, fortunately, is a sanctuary city. You can come to WAR if you're a victim of sexual assault or sexual abuse, regardless to when it has occurred in your life or regardless to who you are. If you've been victimized, we're here to help.
And the cost of these services are
free
$0
free of
cents.
charge.
Just want to put that out there. So there are limited, minimal barriers.
Yes.
Minimal barriers.
No barriers.
And also, if I could just add to the services that I personally know WAR provides, because as a junior, baby DA in the municipal court system, that was my first introduction to the services that were provided. They provide court accompaniment, and they literally have somebody present with you that will come and help you through the process. And a lot of times these people are so trained and so professional and well versed in what they do and their expertise that they can guide people through the process just as well as I can, to a certain extent, in providing backdrop, because they see so much and they know so much and they're so well trained by WAR. I think that's an excellent service, because not everybody has a person in their life that they can confide in.
That's true. And speaking of confiding in, I'm going to take it all the way left. So just hold on to your seats. Are you strapped in? Taking it all the way left. Now we're on the other end of the spectrum. We just spoke a lot about victims or potential victims. Now let's speak about the accused. Those who have been accused of such a heinous crime. What are the protections, if any, are out there for them? Because we hear this a lot. I've been accused, I'm innocent. But because I was accused, I'm in jail. And I don't have the money to bail out because of the egregious nature of the accusation. And now I'm just waiting in jail for trial. What are your experience, your thoughts? Give me something.
So bail is set. There are a few factors that we use when we consider bail. So bail is set based on the need to provide safety to the community, but also, excuse me, to ensure that the person will show up to court. Those are the two factors that we balance when we look at bail. And that is the number by which bail is set. So bail is not set by the district attorney's office. It is set by bail commissioners or judges. Anything that we ask for is a request of the court, and the court has to decide whether or not they will set bail at a certain amount. So just to kind of add that backdrop, because a lot of people don't know who sets bail. They think the district attorney just picking a number and it just
That's what I always thought that. Enlighten me.
No. No. So if I want bail to be set at $25,000, I'm asking, and the judge has to say, I agree with you or I don't. And this is what the number will be. The decision always rests with the court, whether it be a bail commissioner or a judge. So getting that out of the way. As far as protections go, I always, anytime I incur this question, I always encourage people to seek counsel, first of all. If you do not have an attorney, you should retain one. And if you are not able to afford an attorney, our public defender's office is top notch, in my opinion. I have the honor of working with them every day of my life. And they are great attorneys. So seek counsel. If you want to privately retain someone, that's fine. If you want to go with the public defender's office, providing you're eligible, you should reach out to them. They are at 13th and Sansom. And they have, like I said, great attorneys. You should be candid with your attorney about what's going on. Provide all the information that you need to provide. And also discuss with them what your options for bail are, because oftentimes there can be alternatives. That's not to say there are going to be alternatives in every case. But to the extent that there are, people need to relay that type of information to their attorneys so that their attorneys can relay it to the court. I think a lot of the frustration that people have is interfacing with the court is not a personal engagement. So a lot of times people will write the judge and say, I think this. Well, a lot of times those things need to come from your attorney, because there are also legal mechanisms that prevent people from speaking to the accused. So when someone says something to me and they've been accused of a crime, I can't talk to them. I need to talk to them through their attorney. So if I receive a letter, I'm sorry?
Is that a breach of ethics if you do?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Because at the point in which someone is arrested for a crime, they have the right to an attorney. So I can't violate that right by just not letting them know that they have it. So, you can imagine a world where it's not COVID and we're walking through the courthouse and someone pulls me aside and say, I didn't do this. This is what's going on. It is my job to say, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude to you, but before you speak to me, you should speak to your attorney. And if you still desire to speak to me, you should do so with your attorney present, because you have certain rights. And it's important that I, as a prosecutor, don't actively engage you in violating those rights. So seek counsel. That's the biggest rule.
Now, I am an avid fan of SVU. And I've also heard real cases where people decline the, legal counsel, and they decide they want to defend themselves.
Go pro se is what it's called.
What is it called?
Pro se.
Pro se?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What are your thoughts about that? What's the reality in doing something like that? And what would you tell someone who may have been accused of something? Hey,
I, again, always encourage people to seek counsel because I know that people feel like they can advocate for themselves. I know that people feel like they can read the law and interpret it and then implement it in their particular situation. But there's a reason why people are trained in this. There's a reason why we're licensed in this, because we know the law and we're held to the standard of knowing it. And if you decide to represent yourself, there is no I didn't know the law excuse to that, because you've chosen at this point to say that you do. So I always encourage people to not do that. But you also have the right to change attorneys if that's something that you would like to do, right? So if someone's working with an attorney, a lot of the complaints I hear is that, oh, I don't have a good relationship with my attorney, or this person never answers my calls or something like that. Okay, you have the right to terminate that attorney-client relationship and engage another attorney. That is always someone's right. So I would encourage people to do that instead of saying, I'm just going to walk into court and defend myself, especially when we're talking about cases such as this, because the penalty, the legal penalty for sexual misconduct is high. And if you're an adult, you can end up on a lifetime sex registry or some other period of time, depending on the crime. The stakes are too high to leave it to your, thoughts and feelings and what you think you may know about the law.
I appreciate you saying that a lot. I really do. Teresa, do you ever get any persons walking in saying they were a victim of said crime, and they say, well, do I need an attorney? What are my next steps? How do I get defense that I feel will be reliable to securing the conviction?
Well, the reality is that more times than not, survivors do want to go forward, with their case. It takes a lot of courage. Let me put it to you that way, because the reality is that we know how society historically has viewed women, and I'm going to use that term loosely here, in terms of it's her fault. And so we're always working with, our clients to get the help that they feel they need. We know that the statute of limitations has been put in place. I know it's been extended in Pennsylvania, in which a survivor of sexual assault can, seek legal or civil or both recourse. And so we're going to always say, get an attorney. If you want to go forward, get an attorney. I am one of those advocates that really encourage, that's Teresa speaking, for survivors to speak with SVU. I want people to engage law enforcement early on. So this way, as much information, it lends to credibility, because we also recognize that the defense attorney is there to make sure that their client hopefully doesn't spend time in jail. And the reality of it is, we definitely want to make sure that people get legal support. You need an attorney. If you're dealing with anything where there's crime involved, you need an attorney. Something, as Adara Combs was speaking, that came to my mind is, people need to think about their interaction so that they don't need an attorney. They need to think about their interaction so that they don't end up accused. I train and do, trainings pretty frequently for young males and adult males. And one of the things that I talk about is, if you're big enough to want to engage in the sexual activity, you're big enough to have the kind of conversation that makes sure that the person that you're involved with is comfortable with each and everything you want to do in that intimate time. And
can we talk about consent?
Yes.
Consent.
Okay.
And Adara, you spoke about it earlier. I want to stress this conversation, that word, consent.
Yeah. Yes.
A few questions about it, and now I'm officially going in order. What is consent? What is that? And we'll get to the NDAs, non-disclosures, and the consensual, contractual agreements. There are cases, like a really pretty big case going on now for, I'm not going to say their names, but individual celebrities who have been allegedly accused of said crimes, and the allegation was they did not receive official consent. There was some drug use. What is consent?
So consent is interesting and it's also fluid. So I know a
Mhm.
lot of the things that I'm saying are like, oh, it's case by case, oh, it's fact specific, but it truly is. So I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking that if they did not say no overtly and out loud, then that means that their conduct, they're running, they're pushing, they're crying, they're kicking and screaming, cannot also be construed as a lack of consent. So consent in and of itself, like actually would be consenting, agreeing, saying yes to I am okay with you doing XYZ or I want to do you doing XYZ. Now, the reality of that situation, and like I think we said early on, is that what's legal and what's real are not the same things, right? Like you're not walking into the bedroom like I have a legal document here for you to sign
Really?
and indicate that you are
every night.
confirming that you're willing to have sex with me on an ongoing basis. Please check the boxes for the items that you're willing to do. Like that's not real. We're not doing that, right?
We're not.
And I saw.
No, we're not.
Maybe you are. Maybe
no, I'm just. Is it okay? The question I have about that, because guys ask, people ask this all the time. Is that something that will uphold legally? Like if someone says, okay, well, I need you to sign this document, and they sign, they agree, they engage, then tomorrow it's like, you know what, I actually didn't even want to do that, and I changed my mind. How does that work?
So there's a difference between remorse and there's a difference between the fluidity again of consent, right? Like, so I could right now say, yep, Adara Combs, Esquire, agrees to have sexual intercourse with John Doe. That doesn't mean that during that sexual intercourse or right before or in the middle or as he's doing this or doing that, I can't change my mind. And that piece of paper doesn't negate my ability to say no or to push or to kick or to whatever. So the idea that a piece of paper can absolve someone from possible legal ramifications and blame for their conduct once someone clearly indicates to them that they are no longer in agreement to this interaction is a fiction. People should divorce themselves of that idea. I don't think a written document would save anyone from me personally prosecuting them if they have decided to continue to have sex with someone who has made it clear that they are no longer game for this situation.
And I'm glad you brought that in, because sometimes people will consent under a preconceived idea of what they assume is going to take place, and maybe someone included activities that they did not officially agree to, which changes the confines of the initial agreement, which is that rape?
Absolutely. So if we're having sexual intercourse vaginally or anally, and someone decides that they want to do something different and I'm not consenting to that, I have not consented to that act. There's no all-encompassing yes. There's no blanket yes to everything. That doesn't exist. So the rule of thumb is truly, and I don't mean to be anecdotal, but like no means no. And you need to read the person in the space that you're in. If you're having what you perceive to be consensual sex with someone, and then it shifts gears and they're clearly indicating that they're not into what you're trying to do with them, that will be falling under the guise of these statutes that I'm reading.
And according to the law, you cannot legally consent if you are under the influence of any illegal substances and or alcohol, not in wherewithal of your mind. If you are incapable of having a full understanding of what's happening because you may be incapacitated in some way, but the other person may not be. But what if both people are under the influence, and then there's that potential remorse tomorrow? Who's at fault?
So again, this is definitely one of those areas that's super fact specific and will take a lot of delving into what actually happened, because it's also important to find out how that person became intoxicated or inebriated. Because if it's a drugging or an intentional intoxication, that is very clearly falling within the lack of consent. But if the two of us are out at a bar and we're both having drinks, that creates a different situation. So it's very fact specific. But once someone begins to drug you or intoxicate you for the purposes of having sex with you, that will be considered a violation of the law.
You know what? I guess it opens the door to know why attorneys will ask, well, how many drinks did you have? Which is triggering, but I guess really to understand the scope of Were you drugged? Did you voluntarily take it? Not that it absolves if an egregious act took place, but just to get the full scope of what took place.
Absolutely. And when I talk to victims of sex assault, or survivors rather of sex assault, and I ask very personal questions, I always preface with please understand that I'm not doubting what happened to you. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but I have to ask these questions to understand what took place, what information was missing, or what information was relayed, or what happened, because what I don't know, because I wasn't there, is what you and that person know. So I need to know what they know, what you know, so I can piece together the story. So that's why you're getting those types of questions. It's not because people don't believe, but it's because I wasn't there. So I don't know how many glasses of wine you might have had and how that wine impacts you, because that's also different. I could have 3 glasses of wine and be perfectly fine. You could have 1 and be laying on the floor. So we need to figure that part out too.
That's true. I also have another question in terms of the consent, but also leading into the act itself. You find a victim or a survivor who's pointing out an accused, and the accused has no criminal record. What happens with that? And there's no evidence. There's no rape kit. There were no witnesses. It's your word against their word. How do you support a person trying to move forward? And if there is no evidence, is the accused still protected because there's a lack of evidence? Does the potential survivor receive no justice? I know it's a lot to give you, but I'm just curious, because that's also, what's the percentage for convictions for sexual assault, rape? Do we know? Or
So I don't have the percentages in front of me, and I'm very cautious at providing numbers and percentages when I have not vetted those numbers.
Okay.
But I will say this much, and then I'm going to also ask Teresa to discuss, because I am sure that you see those cases on the front end before I ever see them in court, because sometimes I don't, right? But more important, I just want to make it clear that there are a lot of cases that go to trial and are victories as far as prosecution goes, when the only evidence we have is testimony. Because the truth of the matter is, and what I think we all need to keep in the back of our minds, or not even in the back, in the front, is that sex assaults are not occurring in public places with witnesses. Like, by the very nature of sex, that's not where they're happening. So the likelihood of you being sexually assaulted in the middle of the square in City Hall is slim, as opposed to the dark alley that you're walking down where there are going to be no witnesses, right? And just because a sexual assault occurs, because there's also touching, right? So there's not always going to be DNA. So people should divorce themselves of the idea that if there's no DNA, if the person did not ejaculate or leave some type of physical evidence, or, there's no fingerprints on my body because it happened 2 days ago, there's nothing that can happen, because the very nature of sex assault leads us in the opposite direction. A lot of these cases are won off of the testimony of the witnesses and any corroboration that we can get, which we do try to get, whether there were witnesses, who they told, because that also weighs heavily. When they told them, so on and so forth. Consistency is important to also look at, but it's not just the physical evidence. If we were waiting for physical evidence for all our sex assault cases, we wouldn't have a lot.
Once a report is made by someone, once a report is made by a survivor, is that going to be maintained as a matter of record? If it does not lead to a conviction, is it still public record?
Once someone, do you mean like a police report is filed, or once they tell someone?
If a police report is filed, it doesn't end up with a conviction.
So the public doesn't have access to police reports that are just existing. You know what I mean? So you would the public has access to court records, like if they wanted to see what case was listed on what day, they have access. They can request documents from the police department, but that is a high standard for whether or not you can get those. But as far as if I were to go into SVU and say something happened to me, but it didn't go anywhere, no, the public would not be able to have access to that document.
And I say that because often there are instances where there is someone being accused. They do not have a criminal record for whatever reason, either through intimidation or the person just the another victim probably didn't want to move forward. Does it actually make any sort of record? Like, how do you say, huh, there's a pattern, even though it didn't lead to a conviction? How do we determine a pattern of someone with a no conviction? How does that work?
So let me just mark the difference between what's accessible to the public and what's accessible to me. So if someone has a history of sexual assault or rapes or inappropriate touching or whatever the case may be, even if that case doesn't lead to a conviction, I will still be able to look into it if that's something that I feel is necessary. That does not mean that I can necessarily use it at trial. Right. But I will know. It's not like this person never existed. I will be able to look into that. And SVU and the district attorney's office is very good at making sure that we connect those types of dots to make sure that we're well informed on who we are dealing with as far as the accused. And I also just want to mention that not having a record doesn't mean that someone didn't commit a violation against someone. So, and that's not how we charge cases. I personally did my 6 months in charging, as a lot of prosecutors do. And when you're looking at a case, I've never said, oh, this couldn't have happened because the person doesn't have a record. Like, that's not at all a part of my consideration at all. And the facts of the case are part of my consideration. Whether or not the person has a record is quite honestly inconsequential at the charging stage, as long as the evidence is there or as long as the statements are there and so on and so forth.
Teresa, have you noticed, potential consumers being afraid to move forward because they're like, well, who's going to believe me? This person is an upstanding citizen. They don't have any record. What do you say to that? To them?
Well, what you have to do is encourage the person to do, first of all, what's in their best interest. That's why one of the reasons we actually have counseling. And sometimes after people have engaged in some counseling, they feel stronger that they're in a position to move forward. As Adara Combs stated, we do have court advocates, one in the family court and one at the CJC, that's with the survivor at all prelim hearings, but in many cases, a lot of trials. We see it all the time. People are measuring themselves against the other person, who this person is in the community. The reality is, if you've been victimized, you have a right to file a criminal complaint. And so we support people again making that criminal complaint. I know WOAR, we have one of our key advocates, Lakeisha Anthony, has actually done work with other advocates in Harrisburg. And so the statute of limitations for reporting has been extended for adult survivors as well as child survivors. So if there's nothing else that, your audience takes away, if there's a point in their life that they believe that they have they feel strong and they want to go ahead and move forward prosecution, they should talk, connect with our DA's office, connect, with your attorneys and move forward. I think it takes courage to move forward, but by moving forward, we make it less and less where we have this thought process that if I speak up, nothing is going to happen. I can tell you that there are many cases where people move forward, face their accuser and win. And, as Adara Combs said, there's oftentimes not a lot of, DNA, not a lot of physical credibility. Survivors know how to present themselves. And if you've been victimized, you have a right to be protected and you have the right to have the law work in your favor. Again, if I say anything, because I teach prevention a lot, you take care of, people have to do self-inspection. You don't do anything that you think could create harm to another individual. If it's hesitancy, if there's kind of suspect, you're not feeling good about it, just walk away. Don't do it. It's too many people that want to do what you want to do and want to do it how you want to do it. Find that person. But if you got to do a whole lot of dialogue and do I have to write a contract and all this other kind of crazy stuff, that's probably a good sign. Don't go down that direction because you're going to have some problems down the road.
That's true.
That's a good point.
That's a great point. Someone sent this question to me recently. Should potential victims or survivors be given lie detector tests? Should they be given lie detector tests at the time of making a report, filing a report?
Well, I'll just start with lie detector tests are not admissible in court. So there goes that. That's the short answer.
Next.
No.
So it's not.
But also, just can I make another point that's kind of related to that and a little more realistic? I hear people, and I personally dealt with cases where people will try to set up makeshift wiretaps and call people on three-way and record conversations and do all types of stuff in an attempt to get someone to confess to a wrongdoing. I've seen this in a lot of different scenarios.
That's legal in Pennsylvania?
No, and that's
Okay.
the point.
Thank you for clearing that up.
That was my point. I would say, and kind of echoing what Teresa said, if you feel like you need to go down the route of criminal prosecution or reporting something to the police, because reporting it doesn't not automatically equal criminal prosecution, but if you feel like you need to go down that route and report something to the police, do so. Don't try to, MacGyver a confession and get a recording and a video and
that is before your time.
Right.
Don't do any of that. Listen, I stayed home with my grandparents. I watched MacGyver. But don't do any of those things, because what I often see is that you end up harming not only the prosecution, but also your credibility, because now you've put yourself in a position of an investigator, and you don't want to. I've never, and I'm going to knock on some wood, I've never won a case because my victim or my survivor was an investigator. Okay. I've won my cases because they truly just displayed their honest, what happened, and they just have been able to relay that information to the court and to the jury in the most honest and raw and sincere fashion. Those are the cases I've won. I've never won a case because my victim decided that they were going to be Detective Jones today and go out and get the confession. Not a thing. Don't do it. Leave it to the professionals, because you also place yourself in harm's way.
Yeah.
If someone were to discover that you're recording their conversation, that might not go too well. So leave it to the professionals. Go down to SVU, go to the police department, call the district attorney's office, seek assistance and support from WOAR. Those are your resources. Trying to put together video recordings and stuff that's not the lane in which you want to travel when you're a survivor of sex assault. You also have way too much on your plate to deal with to add that to it. I'm
glad you spoke about credibility, because some people feel as though they don't have credibility depending on there are people who are sex workers, there are people who are in specific industries, and they're like, well, who's going to believe me? They're going to look at me as if I'm not whatever. What if a woman or a person cheated on their partner with the person and it went left, where they didn't consent to all of the activity that may have taken place?
I mean, any person can be sexually violated regardless of their profession, regardless of the work that they do, their preferences sexually or otherwise, any addiction, that none of those things preclude you from being victimized. So I really get bothered and almost triggered, so to speak, when people try to create qualifications for victims of crime, because it's like, how dare you? Right. No one asked to be victimized. So how dare you try to create criteria for someone to find protection under the law? So if someone's a sex worker and they have been sexually assaulted, that's a crime. If you are, cheating on your significant other and things went too far, that's a crime too. If you got yourself in a sticky situation and then eventually was like, this is not for me, no, please don't do that, stop, that's still a crime. Those are all crimes.
Okay, I appreciate you saying this. I appreciate you both in this conversation. You've answered pretty much every question that I had and then some. Very succinctly, very well. I appreciate the work that you both are doing in the community and protecting survivors and, enforcing the laws, not our own perceptions of what we think the law is, but the legitimacy of the law. The statutes, the law.
The codification of the law.
The personification of the law in all of its glory. And I hope that this conversation helps someone. Please feel free to share it on our platforms. I'll be sharing the links to the entities that we spoke about and the links to the research that you also brought up. Thank you for joining us at No Chicanery. Any last comments? Any last words?
Thank you for providing a forum and a space for this conversation. I mean, a lot of adults do not engage in this type of dialogue, and I think people are often embarrassed to admit that they don't know what consent really is and at what age someone can do so and what an assault is. So thank you so much for creating this forum and for the invitation and for connecting me with Teresa. It was a pleasure to also engage with her.
I'm thinking the same thing. I'm just going to echo Adara Combs. Also, just WOAR's hotline is available. If you are a survivor and you don't know which way to go, just give us a call. We have a partnership with the DA's office. We have a partnership with other organizations in Philadelphia, including the Domestic Violence Agency. If you don't know where to turn, give us a call. We'll help you get there.
All right.
I won't apologize for the way you make you feel, and I won't apologize for the